Hi, and welcome to this week's Wu Wei Wisdom Life Lessons teaching. It's great to be back with you all. This week, we are talking all about trust. Now, many of us experience trust issues at some point in our life, whether it's difficulty in trusting other people or life situations. Often, our childhood experiences form the origin of these issues, and it is our scared and insecure inner child that makes it difficult for us to trust as an adult. While solving issues around trust is not as difficult as you may think, but it does require getting to the root cause of the problem and doing some inner child work. Well, in this week's teaching, we're going to be explaining how you can overcome your trust issues by communicating with your inner child, resolving any childhood trauma issues, and learning to connect much more deeply to your natural intuition. Okay, David, so why is it some people find it so difficult to trust?
I think this is going to be a challenging teaching for us to go through. So if this applies to you, I would always say, before you proceed, just take a moment and do your own definition on what you mean by trust. What do you believe trust is? Is trust that somebody has to 100% always fulfill what they've told you, without question, without default, without making a mistake? If that's something close to what you believe trust is, then the next question I'd ask you is, can you live to that standard? So I would ask you to take a moment and ask yourself, what is your standard of trust? How do you define it?
Well, I guess most people would say that to trust is, if we're talking about trusting other people, is for that person to do what they said they were going to do. So, or for that person to treat me in the way I would like to be treated, and for them not to abuse me or let me down or betray me.
Exactly. So then you've got to find out, has that person given you that guarantee that they're going to do that? And then, you see, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky, and it's not black and white. And you'll see us now talking about the emotional pendulum. If somebody would look you in your eye and say, I will love you forever, let's say they say that to you. Does that mean that all the time, all through the rest of your life, they're going to love you forever? If you said that to somebody, does that always mean that you're going to fulfill that promise, that trust? Are you going to do that? Is any human being, can we do that? Can we say, I am going to always do this? I am always going to deliver on this trust 100%.
But I think our inner child has that expectation of all or nothing, that they must love me. They can't let me down. They must do what we've agreed. They must. And I don't know. It's almost like it's our inner child, that scared and insecure inner child within us that has that expectation.
Well, I think the word you use there is really important. And I'm glad we're going to kind of guide it towards the inner child work, because I think that will help you to understand what you mean by trust. And the word you used there, which was very important, was expectations. And so when we're a child, we do have expectations quite correctly. Quite correctly as a child, you and I were codependent. We depended on our family, on our parents, on the adults around us, our teachers, our grandparents. That is absolutely natural, normal. That is how we have to grow up, because we can't put a roof over our head or feed ourselves or clothe ourselves or educate ourselves. We have to depend on other people. And then when they do not meet our expectations, that's where the trouble lies. The interesting thing for me is, where does a child get their expectations from? And normally they get it from what they're told, what they see on TV, how they compare themselves to their friends at school and watch their families and say, well, I'm not getting this. My father, my mother, if they really love me, oh, I wish I could tell you how many times I hear this when I'm working with my clients on inner child work. If my parents really love me, wouldn't they have acted in this way? And then the child, part of your mind that we call the inner child, then say, oh, they didn't act that way, then that must be to do with me. They haven't lived up to my expectations, what I believe a parent should have done. Therefore, they've broken my trust. They've broken my definition of a parent. I was working with a client just 2 days ago, and he actually said this, well, aren't parents like gods? Shouldn't they do this? Shouldn't they deliver? Shouldn't they sacrifice themselves and their lives for their children? Why did they bring me into this world? And you see, as you start to develop that, how this trust then becomes very complicated.
I mean, I can see how, as a child, if we've been living our life in a certain way and experiencing positive feelings of love and comfort and security from our childhood environment, from our parents or carers, and then all of a sudden something happens that changes the circumstances. A parent leaves the family, we experience some form of abuse. It's like a complete shock to our system. Yes. And that is when we lose trust. We stop. If that person who's so very important to us in our life and up until now has been giving us green light feelings of comfort, security, love, something happens, their behavior changes, how they relate to us changes, they leave the family group, we then lose trust as a child.
Absolutely.
And we experience such painful emotions from that one experience or series of experiences that it's like that part of us as a child says we never want to experience it again. So we want to protect ourselves, and we make a kind of like a vow that I'm never going to put myself in that position again where the way I believe my mummy or my daddy or my grandmother was always going to be there for me or always kind to me. I don't want to experience those red light feelings again. So that's where the trust issues come from, would you say?
I would say a lot of the trust issues come from something like that, Alex, and that's very well explained. Because when you were a child in that situation, you had a childlike perception of the world. And nearly all children have a very black-white, we call it the emotional pendulum, right, wrong, good, bad, my way or the highway. A child has this very opposite point of view. There's no wu wei, there's nothing in the center. And if you've got a physical child now, just watch how they judge things, how they react. It's very extreme. And this is why I believe the Wu Wei teaching can be very helpful for you to go back and to look at those conclusions that you raised as a child. Are they, and here comes a very important Taoist word, are they appropriate to the situation? I like what you said about, let's use the analogy of being burnt. So let's say as a child you put your hand on the gas and you burnt yourself, or the electric and you burnt yourself. Would you then say, I am not going to go close or near to any gas or electric ever again the rest of my life? I have totally lost trust in that cooking source. Now, a child probably would, but as you grow up, you then mature and you become an appropriate and you learn how to deal with that incident. And this is what happens. We formulate this very firm, concrete assessment. They broke my trust. They let me down. I hear clients saying, they abandoned me. They promised me things. A parent shouldn't do that to a child, should they? And they could be absolutely correct. Perhaps the parent was going through some trauma of their own, perhaps they had their own emotional issues. But you can't then cast a die on every situation and say, I'll never trust again. Here's something I heard just last couple of days. I can never trust again because I've been let down once. I was let down by my last partner, my last husband, and therefore I will never trust another man. You see how it swings to the extreme.
And you know, when we experience someone letting us down or some deceit or dishonesty from someone else in adulthood, and that then weighs very heavy on us, it's almost like evidence collected. We use that almost like evidence to support the original. Say we form the belief in childhood that people aren't to be trusted.
Yes.
I never want to get hurt again. Then that part of our mind that we call the inner child is then constantly, from that point onwards, looking to future-proof itself, looking to avoid pain, hurt, being rejected, if you like, being abandoned. So it's always looking for evidence to prove the belief that people will let me down, people cannot be trusted. So it catalogues everything.
And the interesting thing in that now, Alex, before you move on, then you create a law of attraction, which draws those type of instances and people more into your life. If you are trying to future-proof yourself about being abandoned, being let down, being lied to, you're almost attracting that energy into your life. And so this is why this teaching is complicated and something you should go down, start at what is your definition of trust, where did you get it from, what are your expectations, and then the inner child. Do you live to your expectations? And this is what I find time and time and time again. My clients will give me their expectations about someone should always do what they promise. They should never deviate. They should never go off course. And then we look at what they do, and they do it all of the time. And so this is what causes this internal conflict within them, because they're doing what we call in our model CCJ, comparing, criticizing, and being judgmental, but then they can't live that to that standard themselves. And so this gets more and more complicated. And this is what we're trying our best to unpick. But you can see it can be very complicated because as human beings, will we always do exactly what we promise? Well, we can't, because we only learn by making mistakes. So no human being can actually always do what they set out to promise to do. There will be some deviation. There will be some 10 years on, another perception on that subject. And that's why in relationships, when we're doing our relationships videos, we're always talking about the real nub of a relationship, the real foundation is communication, is to be able to choose, because always human beings are developing, changing perception, and you should be able to communicate that.
I want to talk to you about the expectations issue. I can see that as a child, it was quite reasonable for us to have expectations of our parents, our carers, our teachers, for them to look after us, because we were in a codependency situation. But now as an adult, isn't it also reasonable to have some expectations of other people? Like we can't just allow people to treat us like a doormat or be disrespectful for us. There has to be some, particularly if we're entering into a relationship with someone, whether it's a business relationship or a personal romantic relationship, there has to be some, we have to have expectations of that other person.
Yes, absolutely, 100%, Alex. But that expectation should be appropriately thought about. If you're saying what this person says to me, they will be able to maintain 100% the rest of their lives. I'm saying, can we as human beings, can you sit down as you're watching this video and give a solemn promise to somebody that you will never break, even 5 years, even 5 minutes, but 5 years or 10 years or 15 years or How do you know what position that you'll be in? And particularly look back on your life now and see how you viewed things 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and see how your perception has now changed. And that's what the Wu Wei wisdom model is teaching you, is you should be always be able to communicate and to express and to talk about if your perceptions are changing and that's affecting someone else. You should be able to communicate to them how and why it's changing and how that perception will now affect them differently.
And so in this communication, what I'm hearing you say is that it's important for us to be clear with the other person as to maybe what our expectations are, or what our boundaries are, or what we hope to get out of the relationship, and have that open communication. And then we can hear whether that other person is buying into the same set of beliefs or the same set of values.
Yes, and so that's what I would call Shen. You may call your spirituality or your spiritual energy or your inner knowing or your inner self or your inner wisdom. Doesn't matter what name we call it. But to connect to that, you should always be speaking truthfully. What is your truth? Honestly, telling the other person what you honestly believe and acting with integrity. Now, if you could maintain that, if you can always be truthful, and most people will tell me, well, yes, of course I am, except for white lies, except for half lies, except for this, except for that. And I think that's where this teaching is so challenging, this trust. Can you trust yourself? Can that part of your mind that we're calling the inner child trust you? And that's why I think this metaphor, this idea of the inner child works so well. Not perfect, but so well. Yes, you may call it your ego. You may call it your emotional mind. You may call it your subconscious mind. But I think the inner child metaphor is much better because then you can perhaps frame it or think of it as your spiritual child. And you are the spiritual parent. Can your spiritual child trust and rely on you? And when I do this work with my clients and we cut back all of the stuff that we talk about is in our videos, and then we get down to the real core where we make a difference, where things can change, you find that the part of your mind that I'm calling the inner child has lost trust in you. And that's why I said at the very beginning, if you're still with me, go back and define what you mean by trust. And are you trustworthy to yourself? Do you live by what Alex says, your expectations? You may call them morals, you may call them principles, I would call them beliefs. Do you trust your beliefs and do you maintain that in the face of difficulty, as Alex said, with romantic partners, with work colleagues, with bosses, with your career? Do you maintain that inner trust with yourself? And I would say the answer to this complicated situation of trust starts with you. And that's the benefit, really. As you're listening to this video, this doesn't have to involve, do I trust my partner? Do I trust my colleagues? Do I trust my friend? Do you trust you? Are you here? I'm going to give you another important word. Are you self-sufficient? Are you independent? Are you proud of yourself? Do you create those green light feelings that you are living by your integrity? And that's what I would like you to think about as trust, more about yourself. Because then what other people do, they're going through their journey. If you're self-sufficient, you're more able to deal and adapt to what's happening around you.
And so I can see that what you're saying is if we trust ourselves first and foremost, that's the most important thing. If we can trust ourselves, or if our inner child can trust us, then it doesn't mean that we can't be connected to other people. No. It doesn't mean we can't have loving or strong or mature relationships with other people, but that, as you say, people may behave appropriately, people may behave inappropriately, situations may develop in a way that we didn't expect or didn't want to, but that as long as we have this unwavering trust within ourselves, that I guess that we are lovable, that we can cope, that we can stand on our 2 feet, then it makes it's less important what other people or happens with other people or other situations.
Yes, it's even more profound than that, Alex, because if you lose trust in yourself, if you doubt yourself, and this is why the majority of my clients, there's an inner doubt. That they do not believe, as you say, they're good enough. That's the 3 lies, isn't it? You hear me say on all of it, I'm not good enough. Have you said that to yourself? I can't cope. I'm unlovable. And what you're doing then is you're breaking a trust with a part of you, because one part of you is telling another part of you, you're not good enough. And that breaks a very, I would call a spiritual trust. And this is what I would call the life lesson about trust is. Work on yourself more, because as Alex just explained, it creates all that confusion, but it creates something else. It creates what we call a red light feelings. Now you may call that stress, depression, anxiety, anger, frustration. But then what happens, instead of living your life from that authentic trust, that inner knowing, that self-sufficiency, that connection with your Shen, with who you really are, your identity, you now start living your life from your emotions. You become emotionally reactive. You stop forgetting that you create the emotions, and then you use the emotions as the starting point. And then instead of living your life through what you believe, you now say, look what they did to me. They've upset me. And then you live from the upset.
Okay, David, but what I want to know is, we've talked about losing trust in people when we were younger as a child, like our parents, teachers, people who looked after us. But at what point did we lose trust in ourselves? How did we actually lose trust in ourselves?
Well, if you think about our model, that when we say at the top there's the emotional feelings, then there's the thoughts, then there's the beliefs, and then you go down to what we call the vow. There must be something wrong with me. So when things are going wrong as a child, the child is looking for this black, white, yes, no, right, wrong, who's to blame? The child loves blaming people. It's very difficult for a child to blame the people that they need for the codependency. So that's why the child then turns it back onto themselves and said, it must be me. There's something wrong with me. And then that breaks the trust is in yourself, because from that vow, that's why I think it's so powerful that you say this to yourself. It gets kind of embedded. Some of my clients call it ingrained in your mind. And then from then comes, I'm not good enough. I can't cope. I'm unlovable. There's something wrong with me. I'll never make it. I need somebody else. And so all the time, what that's doing on a very deep level, on what I would call a spiritual level, an energetic level, what you're doing, you're breaking the trust with yourself. And this is why this is the life lesson in this complicated teaching. Don't look for other people to keep and maintain the trust. Start with yourself. Get yourself trustworthy with yourself, that you're living to your standards, your expectations, your desires, what you want. How often do you do that? And then what that will do is change your perception. So when other people don't quite meet what they live up to, then you're more able to deal with that through your perception. You have that Wu Wei model that can flow through that, and it doesn't affect you so deeply.
So I can see that every time we criticize ourselves, every time we think negatively about ourselves and our self-talk, as you say, we are it's like another nail in the coffin in terms of us not trusting ourselves.
Absolutely. I would say from my experience, that is more powerful than other people letting you down. I think you're letting yourself down. As I say, and I'd say it in each video, I believe you're awesome. I believe that when you tell yourself these things are like, I'm not good enough, I can't cope, I'm unlovable, the world's against me, poor me, I think that's breaking a deeper trust with yourself. And once you repair and get that trust rock tight, link the chain again, and then you can deal with the twists and turns of life and people around you as they're going through their development and their emotional awakening and understanding.
So we can be more mindful of our self-talk to make sure it doesn't contain those lies. I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. I'm not going to be able to cope with this. But we need to do some deeper work, because it's about the inner child trusting us, that part of our mind, inner child. What do we need to say? How do we need to approach our inner child so it almost starts to come out of its bunker that it's locked itself away in?
Well, that's what we would call in our model reparenting. And we've done several videos on reparenting, and we go through it in detail. We try our best to put it into steps. But the first step about reparenting is about operating from what you believe to be the truth about you, whatever you want to call it. There's so many words for this. You see, this is why I try and clear the confusion. You may call it your standards or your morals or your principles. My word is your beliefs. And I say in every video, very important teaching, or what do you believe? More importantly, why do you believe it? And when you get that, so you have that intrinsic honesty with yourself, that what you say, you can absolutely support it, and it's truthful and it's honest. And then that starts to reconnect this separation in your mind of what we're calling the inner child, you may call your ego, and your true self. And then when those two come together, you become authentic. So if this is something you're kind of not sure about, have a look at those reparenting videos as in the archives, because I think we did a series of 3 separate videos going through it in detail. And so it's a very easy step, but it always starts off with your integrity, your truthfulness, your honesty, you being connected to your source, that what you say you believe and you maintain to the best of your ability.
And so if we're say going to enter into a new relationship, and we're mindful of the teaching, it's about trusting ourselves first in this, to be in this relationship, to be independent thinking before we trust the other person. What if our inner child says to us, well, I don't trust you to handle this relationship, right? Never mind the other person and whether they're trustworthy. You've had every relationship being in has been a disaster. You've mishandled it. You've gone off the rails. It's all gone wrong. I don't trust you. I want to stay stuck. I don't want to go into any more relationships. I don't trust myself to handle it right, or to be able to cope if it goes wrong. How do we work that through as an example with our inner child?
I think that's a really good example. I know you're role playing it, and I think that's a great example, Alex, because I would say as you're starting to develop a new relationship, for me, I hope you don't mind me saying this, you should work on that relationship first. You should get that relationship with your inner child. If your inner child is saying things like that, then it's going to be very difficult for you to have a relationship with anybody external to you if you haven't got a relationship with yourself. And again, if you think somebody externally to you is going to parachute in like an emotional fairy godmother and sort out your problems, it won't happen. And it's you that's got to sort out your relationship with your inner child. And so that trust is rock solid. And so when you enter into a new relationship, you're entering in as whole. You are not a piece of a jigsaw puzzle with a piece missing. You are already whole. And this is the spiritual teaching. This is the Wu Wei teaching. And if there is any doubt in that, then that's your responsibility to sort that out for yourself, because you can't go into a relationship also already being wounded and thinking that somebody else is going to heal you. That's your job to heal yourself. Very powerful teachings, these. And I know they're going to sound harsh, but nobody else can do it for you. You have to understand it. That's why we do these videos, to share with you. You have to understand it. And I see it as two separate that we're trying to bring together into a oneness. And this is why I believe it to be a spiritual teaching based on Taoism, based on you are one, you are already whole. You have to believe in yourself. And that would be my foundation and fundamental step. And that's the life lesson.
And so if our inner child is giving us that self-doubt, is through our self-talk, even though we're trying really hard to not give ourselves negative self-talk, not to talk ourselves down, not to lie to ourselves, if we've still got that little voice of the inner child saying, this is all going to go wrong, you're not going to be able to handle it, I can't trust you.
Yep.
What is it we actually need to say to our inner child, though, to unravel this?
We need to then go through the process of reparenting, what we call the golden thread. You go back down and you find to what he's saying or she's saying, why it doesn't trust you. Because if you just react to the narrative, what it's saying, you'll go round and round on the carousel of despair. Where is the basis of that belief that I cannot trust you? Why? Why can't you trust me? Why is it? And you go down and you go down. And for clients that work with me, I think that's the only thing I really help them with, is to go down through the golden thread. So you go down to the first incident or thought that part of your mind says, you cannot be trusted. I cannot trust myself. Because that, to me, I often talk about a railway track. You remember? If you say, just think about it, you go down one track where you trust yourself, you're whole, you're spiritual, you learn from your mistakes, you grow. Or you go down another track where you do not trust yourself. So if you do not trust yourself, if you doubt yourself, if you believe you're not worthy, that sends you in a totally different direction. And then you're constantly looking outside of yourself to gain worth, to gain value, to gain approval, to gain that stability that nobody else can offer you, because only you can offer it to yourself. And that's why the golden thread, again, that we've demonstrated on many videos, is to go back to that core, because that's what needs to be understood. And it's almost like a program, if you like that idea. It's like you've been misprogrammed and you have to go back and find the line of programming that needs to be adjusted. And then you choose whether you want to adjust it or you don't adjust it.
And I would think when we first start to do this exercise and, ask ourselves, ask our inner child, why is it you don't trust me? Why is it you don't trust me to manage this, to see this relationship through, to enter into a new relationship with someone else? The inner child will inevitably give you all the evidence it's gathered of, well, this relationship failed. Well, you didn't handle that very well. Well, look how that turned out. And I guess that's when we need to kind of compassionately discipline the inner child and say to it, look, those are all the outcomes of you not trusting me.
Exactly.
Those are the results of the self-fulfilling prophecy. What you're talking about is going back to the original point that you lost trust in yourself. So, the original time.
So I call this the fountainhead, the very beginning, when you were not born not trusting yourself. If you didn't trust yourself when you were born, you wouldn't have come down that birth canal. So from coming into this world to now, there was a time when you made a life decision. I call a life lesson, when you chose not to trust yourself. And that's where you've got to get to. And that's where the really powerful, profound, life-changing, I call it enlightenment, that you go down to that point because you said it to yourself. Even if somebody pinned you to a wall and said, Don't trust yourself, don't trust yourself, don't trust yourself. There was a point where you swallowed that pill and you began not to trust yourself. That's where you've got to go back to, because until you reprogram that first belief, then you'll always be on the wrong track.
And so this means reflecting on childhood experiences.
Yep.
And for most people, because it has such a profound effect on them in terms of them making that vow, I'm not good enough, I don't trust myself, I'm not going to be able to cope, I'm not lovable. Inevitably, we can always get back to that incident or incidences. And so when we get there, and it's typically some form of childhood emotional trauma, when we get there, when we reach and recall that incident or incidences, what do we need to say to our inner child? What do we need to teach our inner child to almost, like, as you suggested, changing which track we're on? We've gone down one track and we know we need to go down another track from that point in time.
Okay, so going down through the track can be the most challenging thing because your inner child has created a maze of confusion. It's very good at sidestepping, avoiding, jumping onto something else, not answering the question. That's why the golden thread is so powerful. Why? Now, let's say you do that work for yourself, because I do believe you can do this work for yourself. This is something you can do. Why? Clear the confusion. Don't step on the carousel of despair. And it's almost like, I think about it when I work with clients, it's a deconstruction. It's a deconstruction of an old model. This model has never worked for you. And that's what the red lights are telling you. They're telling you that this is not correct thinking, but it's very familiar. Never underestimate, let me repeat that, never underestimate the power of familiarity. Your mind, that I'm labeling the inner child, will always choose the familiar, even if you know it's wrong. Even if you know it's wrong, you will choose the familiar because it prefers the known to the unknown. And so by working with your child, that part of your mind, and going through and deconstructing, just that process starts to build trust with that part of your mind. Just the process, the simple process of not being thrown away, not giving up, not saying, Craig, it's easier to think this, David. The inner child just goes, well, I've just won that battle. You've just given up. Imagine you had a physical child, and every time the child wanted chocolate biscuits and you said no, the child played up and you said, okay, have a chocolate biscuit. Okay, then he'll just play up. So the process of the golden thread, going through all the confusion, going down, deconstructing and getting to the core belief, you're almost 80% there. Just that process, because you're showing the child integrity. You're showing the child strength. You're showing your child that you will not give up. You're showing your child leadership. You're showing your child parenting. And this is what the child needs. He will push against, like a physical child would push against. But it loves to be told, no, this is what we're going to do. This is why we're going to do it. And having that conversation.
And I love that idea of, if you like, earning the child's trust through being the parent, through being the guardian, through leading the child in a way that you as a child may not have been. So it's like it's almost like you're proving to the child that you can be relied on, because in the past we may have, as you say, ignored the child or agreed with the child or just pushed the child away, not wanting to listen. Now, for the first time through this reparenting work, we can earn trust. So when we get down to the vow, that point in time that we chose not to trust ourselves, do we need to teach our inner child a life lesson? Do we need to widen its
Widen its
perception on what happened? And that's the reparenting. We need to do at that point in time.
That's the key. That's the key. The hard job is you don't go down and tell the child what it should be doing. Because what happens if you told your physical child what they should be doing? They will resist. And that's why I love the metaphor of the inner child. It works just like a physical child. You get through all the confusion, all the temper tantrums that I call squealing piglets, the crying, the shouting, the it's not fair, it's not fair, it's not just. You get through all of that. And then when you get down to the inner child, and I've said in many videos, I've never found a monster. I've never found evil. I've never found a devil. I have found a scared little child huddled in a corner. Now, if you go down there and then start telling it what it should be doing again, you're just repeating bad parenting techniques. What I like to do is to sit with the child. It's almost like I say, okay, sweetheart, okay, son, now why do you believe this? And you'll see when you get down to that, it's based on very childlike interpretations of the world, of relationships, of family members, what parents should and shouldn't do. And then, as Alex has just said, that's the technique. You widen the perception. We've done on many videos. The child sees life through a very narrow pinhole, his way or the highway. And what you're doing, you're widening your perception. I did a radio interview a couple of months ago, and they said, well, what's the secret of this model? And I said, the only secret is the inner child may be stubborn, may be willful, will dig their heels in at any opportunity, will try and mislead you, will do the opposite to what you say. Just like a normal child will want their own way, will see the extremes of the emotional pendulum, right, wrong, good, bad, my way, no way, that's not fair, that's not just. But the secret is your child is not stupid. You are not stupid. And once you clear the confusion and sit with your child calmly, hold its hand, give them a hug and say, okay, let's do this together. Now, stop me when you don't agree, because what you have to do is to make the unfamiliar way become familiar. Let's go back to what I said a few moments ago. If the child values familiarity, you can't just offer him to jump off a cliff because it's unfamiliar. You have to hold their hand and take them step by step. The analogy that I would use here, and I'm smiling because I'm remembering my own son when I was teaching him to ride his bicycle. First of all, he had the trainers on the back. He wouldn't take them off. Then we persuaded him to take them off, and then I had to hold the saddle and the handlebars and run alongside him. Then he would allow me to take my hand off the handlebars. Then I used to have to hold the saddle. Then I let go of the saddle. He would knock my hand away. I don't need you, and off he'd go. And that's the process. That's the process. You find the problem, you solve the problem, you hold their hand, you lead them through it, and all of that is the two energies coming together into a oneness of who you really are. Authentic, amazing, awesome human being.
And so that's the energy of our adult self, the parent, and our inner child.
Together.
And I can see how if we, through consistent, patient, loving, reparenting, honest, reparenting conversations, doing this work with our inner child, this creates familiarity, this creates stability, this creates reliance. So even if, the world we cannot control, or the people we cannot control, but the inner child becomes to learn that it can rely on you, that you can be the consistency, you can be the familiarity, and that the adult you becomes the kind of rock that the inner child can rely on, even if Everything else is in flux.
And so if you think about it, we've just done a full circle on this very complicated. I know this is a complicated subject because I deal with this with my clients as all the time. But you see now we've just done a complete full circle because you use words like reliance, something you can rely on. Well, that's the same as trust.
Exactly.
Same thing, you see. I forget the other thing, something that it can... Stability.
Consistency.
Trust.
Familiarity.
See, all of these, remember what I said right at the beginning. So it might be worth you going back and say, right, what do I mean by trust? What is my definition of trust? And what you just described is a perfect definition of trust. Someone, even at the roughest, when the seas are absolutely at their most powerful, can I rely on somebody to stand with me together? And I think that when you have that internal trust with yourself, then you can deal with the external problems.
Great, thank you. And so I just wanted to touch upon, we've now developed the trust within ourselves, that stability, that familiarity, which it's almost like it gives us that grounding, that stability, that sends our roots right down, that we can manage anything that anyone throws at us, any situations. So now we're looking to relationships with other people. Now we're looking externally to situations, other people. We've got ourselves internally balanced. How do we develop a stronger connection with our kind of, I guess, our intuition, our inner knowing as to make authentic, good, balanced judgments about other people or other things, rather than, say, letting our inner child be hyper-vigilant, rush to extremes?
Well, the inner child won't be doing that because it'll be part of the oneness. So therefore, you will not be looking externally to other people, other partners, other work colleagues, or other friends to come and emotionally heal you because you don't need healing. And so therefore, instead of reacting from your emotional base, you will be reacting from your spiritual base, from your wu wei, from your truth. And so when you're acting from your truth, then you are not so dependent on other people. And if they do let you down, blatantly promise you one thing and go and do something else, then you are in a much more balanced, authentic and truthful position to deal with that reflects you. Allow them to reflect themselves. Allow them to show their true character. Allow them to live by their own standards whilst you still live by your standards. And that's the difference of trusting, first of all, you, and then you'll be authentically be able to trust the unknown of the universe, because we don't know what's going to happen. We can't foresee the future. This road is always twisting and turning. And so you have to be, I often think about it as walking a tightrope. You have to be able to deal with your balance before you start dealing with other people's.
And so if we're more in balance with our inner child, so our inner child is not dominating us, it's not giving us all the negative self-talk. If our inner child is more in harmony with who we are, we're correctly reparenting the inner child. Does that mean then that we are more likely to make authentic, intuitive, wise judgments about other people or other situations?
Yes, but that also doesn't mean to say you're always going to be correct.
Okay. But are you more likely to...
You are more likely.
Yeah.
But we live in a universe of the unknown. So you are more likely to attract the energy into your life, whether that's a partner, whether that's a business deal, whether that's a friend. You're more likely to attract those into your life because you're not crying out as you need something off them. So you're more, remember I said, self-sufficient. And so then you will attract that energy into your life and you will be in a better position to deal when life does throw you a curved ball, because it will. We can't rely, but you'll be much more balanced, much more harmonious. And that's what Wu Wei means, to be in your flow, to flourish, to be the best that you can be. in whatever life throws to you. But it always starts with you first and building up that inner trust. And then you're more likely to bring people into your life who are also more trustworthy.
And that's so true, that law of attraction, and that the energy that we radiate out to other people and other situations. When we've got that inner balance, when we've got that inner knowing, when we trust ourselves, we know we can handle any situation. It really shifts a lot of things, doesn't it?
But there's no certainty.
Yeah, no certainty.
No certainty.
No,
Thank
brilliant.
goodness. Thank goodness. Wouldn't it be boring if we knew exactly what was going to happen, when it was going to happen?
Brilliant. Thank you, David. Well, I really hope this teaching has helped you on the subject of trust. We've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about the inner child. We've talked about dealing with childhood experiences and childhood trauma. And we finally just touched upon this idea of inner knowing, inner wisdom, and intuition. If you have enjoyed the teaching, please do let us know. Share it with someone else who you think may also benefit. David works with clients on all of these issues throughout the week by Zoom video call. And if you'd like to learn more about David's sessions, I will put a link in the show notes below also. And finally, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We produce new teachings every week, and we would love to share your journey with you. Bye-bye.